We have let you down. We refers to my generation, a generation that has allowed this pandemic to emerge and strike people down with sickness, grief, overwhelmed health systems, devastated businesses, and tattered governments. So much for stable systems. And it's not just the virus where we failed you. We polluted the oceans. We paid scant attention to the climate emergency, tore down the rainforest, oversaw the extinction of multiple species, and worst of all, ignored the human rights of women, refugees, and minorities. If ever there was a moment for humanity to capitulate, this might be it. So let this be the moment that goes down in history as the moment seized by our youth. Our global system is wide open, but it won't be for long. We need to learn new ways. So you, the young people, will need to lead with resilience to emerge from this pandemic stronger and be more vital with energy, enthusiasm, and vigor. Be leaders, be resilient. You cannot do one without the other. The young are visionary explorers who have the potential to lead us into a new era. But if you're resilient and you don't lead, you're like a rock in the desert, inert, immovable, useless. If you try to lead without resilience, you will crumble at the first sign of pressure, and there will be lots of pressure. You can choose to lead, you can learn to be resilient. Here's how. Let me share a few stories. When I was 14 years old, I saved my mother's life. We were on a canal boat holiday. For those that don't know, it's a low-powered vessel only meant for use on inert waterways. One evening, we made a near-fatal mistake. We exited the canal and entered the river, which was in full flood. The river was over 1 kilometer wide. As we tried to move across the river laterally, the strength of the current, swollen by recent torrential rain, started to pull our weak little boat downstream. My mother started to panic. I pointed the boat upstream and put the engine on full throttle, which began to belch smoke. My mother yelled at me to continue downstream. I had, however, read the map and was absolutely sure that there was an inlet upstream on the far side of the river. Through the rain, I was convinced I could see a distant green light. I ordered my mother into the cabin and told her to keep quiet in no uncertain terms. I then navigated the boat upstream, nearly breaking the engine in the process. When we finally arrived at Safe Harbor, the lockkeeper came out and asked what on earth I was doing traversing a river in full flood. He told me that just 1 kilometer downstream there was a weir, over which we would almost certainly have spilled, where 10 people on average every year die in boats just like ours. I had decided in that moment to stand up to a parent, an authority, to stand up to a leader, and to fight for what I thought was right. Luckily, on this occasion, I was right. Taking leadership, however, is not easy, but it is a duty. When you have a conviction, you have to stand in the storm for what you believe is right. This is the first rule of leadership. Resilience and feeling good about ourselves go hand in hand. One of the hardest things for us to generate is positive self-regard. And talented people, as I've discovered, are great at beating themselves up. When I was 25, early in my banking career, I worked for a boss who was nothing short of a sociopath. He was an abusive bully who took no prisoners and treated his underlings as if they were worthless. I tolerated this for a while. There came a point, however, when it became too much. His abuse was having a damaging effect on how I felt about myself. I was miserable and I felt oppressed. In the midst of one of his awful tirades, as he belittled me in front of several hundred people, something finally snapped. I reached behind me, took my jacket, and quietly walked out of the building, never to return. Now, in that moment, I was actually devastated. I felt as if I had thrown my whole career away. In retrospect, it was one of the most powerful things I ever did. I had prioritized taking care of myself rather than submitting to a bully. One of the hardest lessons we will learn is to eradicate 3 particularly damaging mindsets. The mindset of complying leads us to please others to the detriment of our well-being. You heard that in my story just now. Second, the mindset of self-protection. Trying to be the smartest guy or gal in the room creates an emotional distance between you and other people. And finally, the mindset of control. Understand that you control practically nothing. If the Stoics were right, all you have control over are your values and the choice of emotional response to how people behave in the world. And that is about it. Most other things are inside your influence, but outside of your control. To truly grow into your most resilient self, you're going to need to let go of these 3 mindsets, and quickly. Very often by doing so, there will be a painful lesson. And normally these lessons come in the grip of something that you did not invite and do not welcome. As the author and filmmaker Sebastian Junger said, virtually every good thing in my life I can trace back to a misfortune. So my feeling is you don't know what's good and what's bad when things happen. You have to wait to find out. So every occurrence in life delivers a lesson. Don't ignore the lessons. By listening to yourself at that moment and seeking out the lessons within, you will build the resilience you are meant to have, which will serve you going forward to become the robust person you need to become. It's called positive reframing, and it's a 30,000-year-old survival mechanism. Use it to your advantage. At 38 years old, by then I had had a stellar career in finance. I'd always wanted to be wealthy since I was a child. I grew up in a poor family with few resources. It seemed the right path and logical. By then I was working for one of the best investment banks in the world. Something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what it was. I felt sad and disconnected from myself. Now, as luck would have it, a couple of leadership professors turned up at the bank, and they took a group of us off to Connecticut in the United States, where we sat in a room for 5 days, taking a long, hard look at ourselves. Boy, did I need that. In 5 short days, my misery turned to elation. The miserable caterpillar who had entered the room emerged 5 days later as a butterfly who knew how to spend the rest of his life. How and why did that happen? Well, we were forced to take a look at how our operating system was built, how our values had emerged. Importantly, we had to make the biggest step of talking about it, of socializing it. We were forced to reflect on the most important things. What did we stand for? What made us sad? What made us angry? What were we passionate about? What did we want to become? I'd never asked myself these questions before, and I had certainly never shared them. I discovered, like many people, that I had been sleepwalking through life. A good first lesson, therefore, in leadership is to make sure that you are fully awake, alive to yourself, alive to your potential, not living someone else's life, but living the life that you choose to live. Reflect. Take a long, hard look at your values. Reevaluate them often. Don't imagine that what you want now is what you will want in the rest of your life. It will change, and you need to be flexible and adapt to that change. So to lead others, you first have to lead yourself. And to lead yourself requires vulnerability. Talk about your hopes, your dreams, fears, and doubts. In that interchange is solid gold, and it changes you immeasurably. When I got divorced, I felt as if my entire life had crumbled. I didn't get married to be divorced. I didn't have children to raise them as a single parent, as I had been raised. It was a hard moment. I found a therapist and I sat in his office for weeks, often in tears. At some point, though, the crying stopped and the realization arrived that I didn't need to cry anymore, that I needed to act. My defenses were hardening and my resilience was building. I started to see the shape of a path forward through the gloom. Talking helps. Talking cures it. So not only leadership, but resilience demands self-awareness. There will be hurdles, challenges, pain points, and pressure. Where is it written that you have to figure everything out yourself? Find a coach, talk to a mentor, a family member, or an old friend who sees you in the full context of your life. High-functioning people are often reluctant to do this. It makes them feel exposed, and that word vulnerability again. Yet there's no shame in exposing your weaknesses. Expressing what you want, who you are, what you fear, and how you feel is a cathartic and important lever on the path to delivering both great leadership and resilience. Don't underestimate the power of talking, and when you have the opportunity to listen, do so with your heart and with both your ears. A few years later, I was sitting by the Aegean with an old friend, a wise old owl from Lebanon. Over a glass of wine, he suddenly said, "You know, I know the meaning of life." Surprised, I said, "Well, I suppose you want me to ask what it is." "Well, I'm going to tell you anyway," he said. "It's two things. Find your tribe and build something. Connect deeply with a group of people and create something that transcends who you are. You can argue with me if you want, but I know that I'm right," he said. Well, I spent many hours thinking about that very simple statement. Because we find so much meaning in deep human connection, and at the same time, life is no party. We are creative, innovative, incredible beings, and our purpose on earth is to use all the agency we can muster to create something that outlasts and outlives us. This is what the best leaders do. As you may have heard, my own journey led me from the world of banking, where my only claim to making a meaningful contribution to society was to pay a lot of taxes, to actually doing something useful. Now, by teaching, coaching, mentoring, advising, I've found ways to help out. Personal meaning comes from being as useful as you can to help others also to make the impact that they envision. Our stay on earth is short, so find a way to be useful and do that. And where possible, do it with people that you like, trust, and admire. To bounce back resiliently from this crisis, we need to find our purpose. The purpose is discovered through a deep understanding of what we value. In a sense, it's your why. It's not a mission, it's not a vision. How do you see yourself living when you are at your most fulfilled? What does that look like day to day, even hour to hour? What activities make you feel so immersed that time stands still? What do you really care about? What do you really stand for? How do you want to live? As you heard, I started life wanting to accumulate as much wealth as possible. And at the halfway stage, I realized that that was not a path to contentment. But that's okay. Knowing your purpose will change and that your life will shift should not deter you from striking out on the path at all. It's a mistake not to set out. It has been strange to find myself as a teacher. I dropped out of school, embarrassed by my grades and with very little to look forward to. But life sometimes goes full circle. My mother was a teacher, and she brought me up with the mantra, never stop learning. I never wanted to teach, yet after taking several different paths, here I am, reading, thinking, learning, and teaching every day of my life. The lessons I take, therefore, from a life fully lived are that leadership is an activity that you must seize, not to have unreal expectations of authority, but to lead whenever you can, however old you are. That means you must remain alert to your experiences and learn from them, accumulating thicker layers of skin as you go, while at the same time remaining sensitive to others. True happiness arises when you create something that transcends you. Start that process today. Reorientate yourself as needed, but never stop creating. And finally, turn that creative process into a means of serving others and the world. In short, stay present, build yourself, create something, and be useful.